So preachers, if they're honest, avoid the Old Testament because it's deemed too hard to understand, too controversial, and too irrelevant. Are you discouraged enough yet? I actually think it helps us to honestly name the challenges that we feel in handling the Old Testament, as well as the challenges that our listeners may have in hearing the Old Testament. So in light of all that, why should we preach the Old Testament anyway? Or better yet, why must we preach the Old Testament? I can think of 4 key reasons that preachers must preach the Old Testament regularly. First, the Old Testament reveals God. The Old Testament reveals God. From the first line of the first page, in the beginning, God created. God is revealed as our creator, as the God who sees, as the God who delivers his people. As we read in Exodus 34:6, the Lord, a God, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. He is a God of holiness, justice, righteousness. Need I continue? This is reason enough that we must preach the Old Testament because it reveals God. But there's more. Second, the Old Testament provides our origin story. From the ancient epics to 21st century superhero movies, we love a good origin story. Our fascination with tracing our ancestry through DNA testing or websites reveals our longing to connect with the story of who we are. The Old Testament provides both our biological and our spiritual origin story. We were created from dust by a loving creator. We were given worth, mission, and purpose. If we only preach the New Testament, we erase the story of our origins. Third, the Old Testament was the scripture of Jesus and the early church. I'm by no means the first to say this. These were the scriptures that Jesus taught, that nourished him, that convinced our earliest church fathers that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. Fourth, I deeply believe that the Old Testament speaks to issues that persist today. We see the stories of broken families, friendships, infertility, miscarriage, sexual abuse, grief, anger, and injustice. We see deeply personal stories of strained family relationships and large-scale narratives of genocides. These are issues that trouble our people today. If we refuse to preach them, we might give the sense that we don't care about them, or perhaps that they don't matter to God. The God who sees the oppressed slave sees us today. The God who remembered the barren woman remembers couples devastated by infertility today. The God who held the Egyptians accountable for their treatment of Hebrew slaves does not overlook genocide today. In summary, there are many reasons why we might avoid preaching the Old Testament. But I hope that you find a renewed yearning to preach the scripture that reveals God, that recounts our origin story, that Jesus taught and read, that speaks to the human condition from in the beginning until creation is made new